History is not always changed by kings or armies. Sometimes it is changed by faith, courage, and an unbreakable will. This is the story of a young girl who stood against an empire and ignited the soul of a nation. This is the story of Joan of Arc. The shepherd girl who heard the voiceless village of Domremy lay quiet beneath a pale winter sky, the kind of cold that carried stories through the wind. Smoke rose gently from the chimneys, curling into the morning air, and rolled across the sleeping fields where frost clung to the grass like silver. Beyond the village, the forest stood dark and still, a silent witness to centuries of war and wandering armies. It was in this small corner of France, far from courts and kings, that a girl named Joan tended her family's sheep. She was no different in appearance from any other village girl. Her hands were rough from the cold, her skirt patched in several places, and her hair tied simply behind her head. But those who knew her often said she carried something unusual in her eyes: calmness, purpose, a softness that made people trust her even when she was silent. The year was 1425. France had been torn apart by the 100 Years' War for generations. Armies marched through villages like storms. England held much of the land. The French crown was weak. People whispered that God had abandoned their country. But Joan didn't believe that. She was only 13 then, yet her faith was so steady that even the older folks noticed it. On that particular day, she had gone to the orchard to gather fallen apples for her mother. The branches were bare, rattling lightly in the wind. She worked quietly, humming a hymn to herself, when the wind suddenly shifted. The air grew warm, almost unnaturally warm for winter. The orchard fell silent, as if the world were holding its breath. Joan paused. She heard something at first, a faint sound like faraway bells. She straightened and turned her head. The warmth grew stronger, settling around her shoulders like a cloak. Then came the light. It was not blinding, but bright enough to change the color of the air. She felt her heart pound against her ribs. Her hands trembled, and then she heard a voice clear, calm, without a hint of earthly origin. Joan. She dropped the apples. They rolled across the ground unnoticed. Do not be afraid, the voice continued. Joan's breath caught. She looked around, but there was no one in the orchard. No figure, no shape, only light. I am Saint Michael, guardian of your people. Her knees gave way. She knelt automatically, overwhelmed and trembling. She could not speak. The suffering of France has reached the heavens, the voice said. God has chosen you to carry a message of hope. Joan shook her head. Me? I am only a girl. You are the one chosen. The light shimmered. Behind it she sensed figures gentle, radiant, familiar in a way she could not explain. A woman's voice joined the first, warm and comforting. I am Saint Catherine. Joan, you will lead France to freedom. Joan felt her heartbeat slow. Something inside her fear, doubt, whatever it had been, fell silent. How can I? She whispered. You will be guided, the voice said. When the time comes, you will seek the Dauphin. You will lift the siege of Orleans. You will raise the banner of France. The wind stirred again. The light dimmed. The voices softened. Be strong, Joan. France waits for you. Then the orchard returned to its ordinary winter stillness. She sat there for a long time, knees on the cold ground, her breath forming pale clouds in the air. She felt as if her soul had been shaken awake. Her hands were cold, but her chest burned with a strange new fire. For days after, she kept the encounter to herself. She feared people would laugh or call her mad. She feared the responsibility of the message itself. She prayed morning and night, asking for strength. And every time she prayed, the same warmth returned: light, voices, reassurance. Months passed. The war grew worse. News traveled slowly to Domremy, carried by passing traders or wandering soldiers. Orleans was besieged. The French prince, Charles, could not claim his own throne. English armies controlled rivers, towns, entire regions. One evening, as the families sat near the hearth eating a simple supper of bread and onions, Joan's father spoke in a tired voice. "They say the English took another town," he said. "If they reach Lorraine, God help us." Joan's mother sighed. "This land has seen enough sorrow." Joan lowered her eyes. Her father didn't notice the tension in her shoulders, the way she gripped her wooden bowl tightly. Later that night, she lay awake listening to the wind shake the shutters. In the darkness, the voices returned not in visions, but in a quiet, firm reminder. "You must go." Her chest tightened. Now? Yes, France waits. The following morning, Joan walked the fields with her flock. She looked at the distant hills, the path leading out of the village. She imagined following it alone, leaving her home, her family, everything she had ever known. She felt fear, but beneath the fear was something else: certainty. That afternoon, she approached her uncle, who lived a few miles away. He was a practical man, careful with words and decisions. Joan knew he would listen before judging. "Uncle," she said, standing in his doorway, "I need you to take me to Vaucouleurs." He frowned. "What business does a girl have there?" "I must speak to the commander. I have been given a mission." "A mission?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "To help France." Her uncle stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to reveal she was joking. But Joan's face was steady, her voice calm. "Uncle, I am serious. God has chosen me to lead France to victory." He blinked. "Joan, child, these are dangerous words." "It is the truth," she said. "I am not asking you to believe it, only to take me to Vaucouleurs." Her uncle studied her. He saw no madness in her expression, only determination and an unusual calm. Finally, he exhaled. "I will take you." Vaucouleurs was a small fortress town where a loyal French commander, Sir Robert de Baudricourt, held ground against the English. Joan had never seen it before. She had never left her village. As they approached the stone walls rising behind the river, Joan felt her stomach twist. "Are you afraid?" her uncle asked. "Yes," she admitted, "but I am still going." Inside the fortress, soldiers moved about with urgency. Some were sharpening weapons, others patched armor. War had made the air heavy with tension. Her uncle approached a guard. "We would like to speak with the commander." The guard looked at Joan, unimpressed. "What for?" "She brings a message," her uncle said. "A message?" The guard scoffed. "From who?" Joan stepped forward. "From God." The guard blinked. then burst into laughter. "Oh, this will be good. Wait here." A few minutes later, they were led into a small hall where Sir Robert de Baudricourt stood over a map. He was a stern man, broad-shouldered, with a beard streaked by grey. His eyes moved between his papers and the two visitors. "What is this?" he said impatiently. Joan stepped forward. "My lord, I am Joan of Arc. God has sent me to lead France to victory. I must meet the Dauphin immediately." Sir Robert stared at her, then burst into laughter even louder than the guard had. "A girl? Lead armies? Drive out the English?" He shook his head. "Child, go home. War is not for you." Joan felt her heart race, but she did not lower her eyes. "My lord," she said calmly, "France will not fall if you help me reach the Dauphin. I ask nothing for myself, only a chance to serve my country." Sir Robert waved a hand dismissively. "Enough. I don't have time for fantasies." Her uncle touched her shoulder gently. "Come, Joan, let's go." But Joan didn't move. Something inside her told her to stand her ground. Before the middle of Lent, "The French will suffer a great loss," she said quietly, "unless you help me reach the Dauphin. And if you do not help me, you will answer for it." Sir Robert froze. "How could you know that?" he said slowly. Joan didn't answer. She didn't know the details herself, only what the voices had told her. Before he could speak again, a soldier rushed into the hall. "My lord, news from the front, another French defeat." Sir Robert looked sharply at Joan. She remained calm. The commander ran a hand over his beard, troubled. Something had shifted in the room. The girl hadn't flinched, hadn't shown fear, and her words had proved true within minutes. "Very well," he said at last. "I will consider your request." Joan bowed her head. "Thank you, my lord." As she left the hall with her uncle, Sir Robert watched her for a long time. A strange feeling crept over him, a feeling he could not explain. He had mocked her at first, but now he felt he had looked into the eyes of someone who believed with such conviction that it shook even a seasoned soldier. Outside the fortress, snow began to fall. The flakes landed on Joan's hair, her clothes, her eyelashes. She looked up at the sky and whispered a prayer. The voices had told her the journey would begin with resistance. Now she had taken her first step, and the fire inside her had begun to spread. The girl who would not turn back the winter snows began to melt when Joan returned to Vaucouleurs. For the second time, weeks had passed since the commander first dismissed her. In those days, she had prayed, waited, and watched as the war crept closer to her village. Every message from the front carried despair. French soldiers were retreating. Civilians were fleeing. Some towns surrendered without even raising a sword, because hope had already died before the battle began. But in Joan's heart, something else had begun to grow. Strength, conviction, a force that did not belong to a shepherd girl. When she arrived at the fortress again, the guards seemed amused. "You've come back?" One laughed. "We told you last time, go home." Joan looked him in the eye. "I will not leave until I am sent to the Dauphin." There was no arrogance in her tone, only calm determination, the kind that unsettles grown men. The guard hesitated, then walked away, muttering something about foolish bravery. inside. The fortress felt more burdened than before. Morale was low, food was scarce, and no one knew who would win the next battle or if France even had a future. Sir Robert de Baudricourt was in the courtyard, shouting orders at a cluster of soldiers. His voice echoed across the stone walls. Joan waited until he finished, and then stepped forward. "My lord," she said, "I have come again." He turned sharply. His eyes narrowed. "You don't give up, do you?" "No," she said quietly. "Not while France bleeds." He studied her for several seconds. She did not bow. She did not tremble. She simply stood there holding the same certainty she had brought weeks earlier. "Why do you insist on seeing the Dauphin?" he asked. "Because God has commanded it." He exhaled slowly. "And you expect me to believe that?" Joan didn't answer his question. Instead, she spoke the words that came to her with complete clarity. "My lord, the French army will not rise unless someone reminds them they still have a country. They have forgotten God's mercy. They have forgotten courage. They have forgotten the fire that once burned in their hearts." Her voice grew stronger. "I cannot lift a sword alone, but I can lift their spirits. I can remind them." Sir Robert crossed his arms. "And why you? Why a girl?" "Because no general has done it. No knight has succeeded. Sometimes God chooses those no one expects." Her words struck him. He felt a strange unease, like he was listening to someone far older than a village girl. Before he could respond, a woman rushed to Joan's side. She was tall, stern, and wrapped in a thick shawl. "My daughter has seen visions," she said breathlessly. The saints appeared to her as they did to this girl. Sir Robert frowned. "Madness is contagious," he muttered. But the woman shook her head. "Not madness, truth. My daughter said France will rise again. She said the English siege will break. My lord, this girl is chosen." A murmur spread among the onlookers. More villagers stepped forward, telling stories of Joan's kindness, her prayer, her unusual wisdom even as a child. One man said, "I have seen her settle disputes without raising her voice." People listened to her. Another said, "Her faith would make even a dying man stand." The commander felt the weight of their words. He had led men into battle for years. Yet he had never seen such unwavering belief in anyone, not even in seasoned captains. Finally, he said, "If I were to send you to the Dauphin, how would you even travel?" "English patrols are everywhere," Joan replied calmly. "Where God leads, the path opens." He almost smiled at her boldness. Almost. But then came the moment that changed everything. That night, a messenger stormed into the fortress. Mud spilled from his boots, his chest heaving from riding non-stop. "My lord," he gasped, "news from Orleans." Everyone stopped. "The siege has tightened. Supplies are gone. They cannot hold much longer." Joan stepped forward, her face pale but steady. "If Orleans falls," she said softly, "France will fall." The messenger didn't even notice her. He was too shaken, but Sir Robert heard every word. For hours afterward, he paced the hall. He replayed their last conversation in his mind. He stared at the map of France. Rivers cut off, cities fallen, allies abandoning them one by one. Then he remembered Joan's prophecy from her first visit. A great loss will come before mid-Lent. And it had. Finally, he made his decision. At dawn, he summoned her. Joan entered the hall quietly. Sir Robert stood before her, arms behind his back, expression unreadable. "You insist you are sent by God," he began. "Yes, my lord. You insist France cannot be saved without you." "Yes, my lord. You insist you must meet the Dauphin." "Yes, my lord." He took a deep breath. "Very well. I will send you." For the first time, Joan's face softened. Relief swept through her eyes, but she did not celebrate. She simply bowed her head. "Thank you. But listen carefully," Sir Robert continued. "I am trusting a girl with a mission that even generals fear to attempt. If you are misleading me, if you are deceived, if this is folly, many will die." Joan lifted her head. "I understand." He studied her expression and realized she meant every word. "You will travel in the company of a small escort," he said. "Men chosen for loyalty, not numbers. You will dress as they do to avoid attention. The English must not recognize you." Joan nodded. She had already known this. The voices had whispered it to her. "Prepare yourself," he said. "You leave in 2 days." The news spread quickly through Vaucouleurs. Some called her a miracle. Others whispered she was possessed. Some soldiers scoffed. Others saluted her as she walked by. Joan paid no attention. She spent the next 2 days in prayer, kneeling in the small chapel until her knees bruised. She prayed for strength, for guidance, for France. And every time she closed her eyes, the voices returned. "You will succeed. Do not fear. We are with you." On the morning of departure, the sun rose weak but golden, the first true sign of spring. Frost melted into dew. Birds returned to the branches. The air smelled of wet earth, as if the land itself were waking from a long sorrow. Joan stood in the courtyard dressed in simple male garments, brown tunic, leggings, boots made for long travel. A sword hung at her side, though she had never used one. Her hair was cut short, partly for safety, partly for disguise. She looked less like a village girl and more like a young squire ready for duty. Her escort consisted of 6 men, some curious, some doubtful, some respectful. Each carried a sword and a bow. One of them, a broad-shouldered soldier named Jean de Metz, approached her. "Are you frightened?" he asked. Joan met his eyes. "Yes," she said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." He smiled. "Then you are braver than most knights." Sir Robert handed her a small banner, white cloth, simple and unmarked. "This is not a war banner," he said, "just a token for your journey." Joan touched it with reverence. "One day, I will carry a banner that leads men into battle," she whispered. He didn't know whether to doubt or believe her, so he simply bowed. Then the gates opened. A cold breeze swept in. Horses neighed. Armor clinked softly. The villagers who had gathered to watch remained silent. Joan mounted her horse. She took one last look at Vaucouleurs, its stone walls, its weary defenders, its struggling people, and felt a burst of determination. "Farewell," she said softly. Jean de Metz called out, "Ride." The group moved forward, hooves striking the earth in rhythmic beats. The morning sun lit the path ahead, turning mud into gold. As they crossed the first hill, Joan looked back one final time. The fortress grew smaller. and smaller until it became only a grey speck in the distance. Then she turned her face toward the unknown, toward destiny, toward the Dauphin, toward a France waiting to rise. The wind brushed her cheek. Like a whisper, "You are not alone." She tightened her grip on the reins. Her mission had begun. The banner that awakened Francesche's journey to Chinon was long, cold, and filled with dangers that would have broken the resolve of any ordinary traveler. But Joan was no ordinary traveler. She was a girl carrying a mission larger than her own life. Every mile they crossed felt as if destiny itself was pulling them forward. The roads were muddy. Forests were thick with bandits who preyed on travelers. English patrols roamed like wolves, searching for anyone loyal to the French cause. Yet somehow miraculously Joan and her small escort slipped past every danger. Jean de Metz, riding beside her, often looked at her with quiet amazement. "You never seem afraid," he said once. "I do feel fear," Joan replied, "but fear cannot guide us." "And what guides you?" "The voices," she said simply. He nodded, not because he fully understood, but because he could sense she believed every word. Arrival at Chinon after 11 exhausting days of travel across forests, rivers, and war-torn villages. The towers of Chinon finally rose on the horizon. The fortress stood on a rocky hill, overlooking the wide Loire River. It was the temporary refuge of the Dauphin France's uncrowned king who had lost nearly everything. By the time Joan reached the gates, she was covered in dust, her boots torn from walking through wet fields. Yet her eyes held the same unwavering light. The guards at the entrance stared at her with confusion. "You say you bring a message for the Dauphin himself?" one guard asked. "Yes," Joan answered calmly. "God has sent me to him." The guards exchanged a look they clearly thought she was mad. But Jean de Metz stepped forward, showing the seal of Vaucouleurs. "She comes under the order of Sir Robert de Baudricourt," he said. "Let her be heard." The guards hesitated, then relented. Joan was led through the stone corridors into the great hall where nobles, advisors, knights, and messengers gathered. Everyone was tense. The air smelled of fear and desperation. France was close to defeat when Joan entered. Murmurs rippled across the hall. "A girl? Who is she?" "Some peasant child. She claims she can save France." The whispers grew louder. At the far end of the hall stood a group of richly dressed nobles. But among them, one figure stood with a simple cloak, blending in with the crowd. Joan's escort whispered to her, "They say the Dauphin sometimes hides among his men to test visitors. Beware, they will try to deceive you." Joan listened, her eyes scanning the room. A tall nobleman stepped forward, pretending to be the Dauphin. "My child," he said grandly, "I am Charles, Prince of France. Speak your message." The hall fell silent, but Joan did not look at him. She walked past him without hesitation, her eyes locked on the man in the plain cloak, the one hiding among others. She walked straight toward him. He froze. "You," Joan said softly, bowing slightly, "are the true Dauphin. God gives you his blessing." A collective gasp filled the hall. The disguised nobleman, the real Charles, stared at her, stunned. No one had pointed him out. Not even his closest advisors could tell when he switched disguises. "You knew me?" he said quietly. "God told me who you were," she said, "and he has sent me to raise your army and break the siege of Orleans." Charles motioned for everyone to leave the hall except Joan. When the doors closed behind them, he said, "Tell me, why would God choose you?" "Because France has forgotten courage," Joan answered. "But it can be remembered. The people have lost hope, but it can be restored. You have been abandoned by allies, but God has not abandoned you." Her words were simple, but they cut through his doubt like a blade through cloth. Charles had been betrayed, hunted, defeated. He was a prince who feared his own destiny. But in the eyes of this young girl, he saw something he had not seen in years. Faith. Real. Burning faith, he stepped closer and whispered, "If what you say is true, then France may yet be saved." The test, even after meeting her, the nobles and clergy refused to trust her easily. A girl sent by God? It must be trickery. She should be tested. And tested she was. For days they questioned her, challenged her, tried to confuse her. Priests interrogated her for signs of heresy. Nobles mocked her. War leaders doubted her. But Joan answered every question with clarity. She never contradicted herself. She never wavered. She never grew angry or flustered. She spoke with the calm certainty of someone carrying a message that burned too deeply to be shaken. Eventually, the theologians declared, "We find nothing false in her words." Charles still asked for one final sign. "Tell me something only God could know," he said. Joan looked at him gently. "My lord," she said quietly, "you pray each night for guidance because you wonder if you are the true heir. You fear your legitimacy." Charles felt his heart stop. No one knew this. No priest, no advisor, no noble. But Joan knew. "You are the true heir," she said. "God has sent me to lead you to rings where you will be crowned." Charles whispered, "Then everything I doubted was true." The Bannonneau, the Dauphin, had to decide. France was collapsing. Orleans was starving under siege. The English were preparing their final blow. And here stood a girl claiming she could change everything. At last, Charles made a choice that would alter world history. "You will go to Orleans," he said. "You will lead the army." The hall erupted in chaos. A girl leading soldiers? This is madness. She will destroy us all. It is an insult to our knights. But Charles silenced them. "France has followed you," he said to the nobles. "Where has it led us? Let us now follow her." Joan was given armor-polished steel that gleamed in the sun when she first tried it on. She looked awkward in it, like a young warrior still searching for her place. But inside, she felt a surge of strength. Then came the moment she had been waiting for. They brought her a long wooden pole. Upon it was attached a fresh white cloth. Artists painted upon it an image she described. An angel, a sword, a lily, the symbol of France. And beneath it the words, "In the name of Jesus." This was her banner when she held it in her hands. Her heart pounded. The voices seemed to whisper round her. The fabric fluttered like the wings of destiny. One soldier said, almost in awe, "She looks like a saint." And a warrior, another said, "She looks like someone sent to wake the dead." The army awakens bore Joan, French soldiers had been fighting with the hearts of defeated men. They expected loss. They expected death. They had forgotten victory. But when Joan appeared before them in shining armor, carrying the white banner high, something stirred in the hearts of even the most tired warriors. A veteran named La Haya stepped forward. "If she truly comes from God," he muttered, "then I'll follow her." Another soldier said, "If this girl can ride into battle, what excuse do we have?" 2,000 soldiers gathered to march with her. Old knights who had lost faith regained courage. Young boys too afraid to fight now stood proudly in line. Some cried when they saw her, some prayed, some whispered her name, but all felt it. Something had changed. France was awakening. Departure for Orleans the day Joan left Chinon. The entire fortress buzzed with movement. Horses lined the courtyard. Knights tightened their armor. Archers strapped quivers to their backs. Supply carts creaked under the weight of weapons and food. And in the center of it all, Joan sat proudly on a white horse, her banner rising like a flame above her. The people gathered around, cheering, crying, blessing her. "Save us, Maid. God is with you. Bring back our hope." Even Charles, the uncertain prince, seemed stronger that day. He walked up to her and placed a hand on her saddle. "France rides with you," he said quietly. "And God rides with France," Joan replied. He stepped back and watched as she raised her banner high. "Forward," she called. The army moved. The hooves thundered like storm clouds. The banners fluttered like wings. The people followed in silence. France had seen many armies march, but never had it seen an army led by a simple girl. As Joan rode out of Chinon, she whispered a prayer. "Lord, guide me. Give me the strength to free Orleans. Make me worthy of this banner." The road stretched ahead, long, dangerous, filled with English forces, waiting to crush them. But Joan did not look afraid. She felt the wind lift her banner. She felt the strength of 1,000 prayers behind her. She felt the path open before her like a prophecy unfolding step by step. And she knew the greatest battle of her life was waiting at Orleans. The siege that tested heaven. The road to Orleans wound along the Loire River, where mist clung to the water like ghostly curtains. The French soldiers marched in disciplined lines, but their steps were heavy with the memory of recent defeats. Every village they passed lay half-burned, its people scattered or starving. The war had carved deep scars across the land. Yet wherever Joan passed on horseback, armor shining, banner rising high, the villagers rushed out of their broken homes to see her. The Maid. God has sent her. France will live again. Children ran to touch her horse. Women fell to their knees, praying through tears. Old men saluted her like she was already a general. And Joan, though young, carried herself with a dignity that made even hardened soldiers straighten their backs. "We are close now," Jean de Metz said as their column crested a hill. In the distance rose the walls of Orleans, once a proud stronghold, now ringed by English fortresses, like wolves circling a wounded animal. Fires burned along the enemy lines. Drums echoed faintly. Banners with the Red Cross of England fluttered in the cold wind. Joan felt her chest tighten. "So much suffering," she whispered. A soldier beside her nodded grimly. They've held on for months. Supplies are gone. Many have died. Joan lifted her banner. Then we will not fail them. Entering the besieged city before the French army could reach the gates, English arrows began to rain from distant outposts. Soldiers raised shields, shouting warnings. Keep moving. Joan called. Some soldiers ducked. Some retreated. But Joan galloped forward, banner high, refusing to slow down. Her courage pulled the others forward like a magnet. By nightfall, they reached the river crossing. Boats waited silently in the fog. "You'll have to enter the city by water," an officer whispered. "The English control the land gates." Joan's horse was left behind. She stepped onto a trembling wooden boat, her banner's reflection shimmering in the dark water. The lawyer was restless, waves rising like living creatures. "Are you afraid?" a soldier asked quietly. "Yes," Joan admitted, "but fear cannot stop us." Halfway across the river, the English spotted them. Arrows sliced through the mist. "Stay down." Someone shouted "Dot," but Joan stood tall, refusing to bend. An arrow struck the water inches from her foot. Another grazed her shoulder guard. Soldiers gasped, expecting her to fall. But she held firm. "We will reach Orleans," she declared, "because God wills it." And like a miracle, the arrows slowed. The fog thickened, hiding them from sight. The boat glided to the city docks, where weary defenders waited. When Joan stepped onto the stone pier, a shout erupted. "She's here! The maid has come! Orleans is saved!" Soldiers lifted their helmets in salute. Women cried with relief. Even the wounded dragged themselves to see her. The commander of the city forces, Dunois, approached young, sharp-eyed, skeptical. "So, you are the maid of Lorraine," he said. "Yes," Joan replied simply. "I hope you are everything the rumors say," Dunois muttered. "For we are near the end." Joan stepped past him and looked at the starving, wounded soldiers leaning against the walls. "No," she said softly. "You are at the beginning." Rallying the city that night, Joan toured the city. Fires burned low. Streets echoed with hunger and grief. The citizens had lost nearly all hope. But when Joan walked past, banner in hand, armor shining in torchlight, faces lifted, eyes widened, tears fell. "Is it true?" one woman asked. "God sent you?" "Yes," Joan said gently. "What will you do?" "Free your city." She stood on a balcony overlooking the central square. Hundreds gathered below: soldiers, farmers, widows, children. Her voice rose, clear and strong. "People of Orleans, you are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. France lives in your courage. And by God, we will break this siege." The crowd erupted, a fire lit within them that had died months ago. For the first time in a long time, Orleans believed it could survive. The first assault at dawn the next day, Joan gathered the captains. "We attacked the English fort at St. Loup," she said. The commanders exchanged nervous glances. "It is heavily fortified," Dunois warned. "We will lose many men." Joan lifted her banner. "Then let me lead." Her certainty silenced even the most seasoned warriors. They rode out through a side gate. The English saw them immediately. "Halt the French." "Archers, ready." The fortress walls erupted with arrows. Drums thundered. War cries pierced the air. French soldiers hesitated until Joan charged ahead. Forward, she shouted. Her banner streamed like a comet. Her armor glinted in the sun. She stood in the saddle, fearless, urging them on. Arrows fell around her, clattering off shields and stones. One arrow struck her banner's pole, splintering wood. She didn't flinch. Her bravery shattered the fear in the ranks. The French roared and surged after her. The battle exploded. Steel clashed. Men shouted. The ground trembled under the weight of charging soldiers. Joan reached the base of the fort and shouted, "Break the gate." Battering rams slammed the wood. The English dropped stones and burning pitch. Smoke filled the air. Soldiers screamed. Joan fell to her knees coughing. A commander shouted, "Pull her back. She will be killed." But she rose again. "We will not withdraw," she shouted. "God is with us." Her words drove the French into a frenzy. One final blow, and the gate burst open. The French stormed in like a tidal wave. Within an hour, the fortress fell. Orleans had won its first victory in months. Joan knelt on the battlefield, blood spattering her armor, and whispered, "Thank you, my lord." The next day they attacked another fort. It was fiercer, deadlier. English longbowmen rained death from above. Joan fought at the front, urging the French forward. She moved through chaos like someone protected by an unseen shield. But even she was not invincible. An arrow struck her. The steel tip pierced her shoulder. She gasped, staggered, and fell to the ground. "Joan is down," a soldier shouted. Panic rippled through the French lines. Jean de Metz rushed to her side. "Hold her. Stop the bleeding. Get her to safety." Joan's vision blurred. Pain shot through her body like fire. But she grabbed Jean's wrist. "No," she whispered. "Don't retreat. You are wounded. You need rest." "We cannot fall back," she insisted. "If we fall back, Orleans will lose heart." Jean hesitated. Then Joan pushed herself up, teeth clenched, blood running down her arm. She grabbed her banner with her uninjured hand and lifted it high. "Forward!" she cried, voice filled with something unearthly. "Do not stop." French soldiers stared in awe. Their wounded leader stood bleeding, trembling yet unbroken. Her courage ignited them even stronger than before. They charged. The English line broke. The fortress fell. Orleans was breathing again. Whispers of betrayal that night. While the city celebrated, some commanders gathered in secret. "This girl is dangerous," one muttered. "She commands more loyalty than we do." Another said, "If she wins, the Dauphin will listen only to her." A third whispered. Their jealous voices filled the room. She must be controlled. She must be watched. She could undo the nobles' power. In the shadows, politics plotted against the very hero who was saving France. But Joan, unaware of the whispering vipers round her, knelt in a quiet church, praying alone. "Lord, if tomorrow is my last day, give me strength. But if it is not, give me victory." The candles flickered as if in answer. Outside, English forces prepared for their final stand. Inside, French treachery began to take shape. And above it all, Joan's banner hung from the church wall bright, pure, unburned, a symbol of a storm yet to come. The flame that could not be killed on touched the walls of Orleans like a blessing from heaven. For the first time in many months, the sky above the city held no smoke from burning villages, no arrows in mid-flight, no cries of wounded men. Instead, it carried the faint sound of marching feet, French feet strong, confident, alive. Joan rode at the front of the army, her banner rising high above the morning light. It fluttered like a piece of the sky itself. "We finish this today," she said quietly. Beside her, commanders nodded. Soldiers tightened their grips on their swords. Everyone felt it. Today was not an ordinary day. Today was the day Orleans would rise. The final battle of Orleans. The English had built their strongest fort at Les Trails, a massive structure guarding the river crossing. If that fort fell, the siege would collapse. The French advanced from the west, their armor shining. English archers lined the walls. Drums boomed. Arrows darkened the sky. Shields. Captains shouted. Joan rode straight through the arrow storm. Her banner cut through the air. Soldiers followed her like a wave chasing the moon. The English shouted from the walls, "Shoot the girl. She is their courage. Bring her down." Arrow after arrow shot toward her. One tore the cloth of her banner. Another struck her saddle. A third grazed her neck. Warm blood trickled down. "Fall back," a knight cried. But Joan lifted the banner higher. "Forward. God has delivered victory into our hands." Her voice rose above arrows, above drums, above fear itself. French troops surged ahead like a roaring tide. Ladders slammed against the walls. Soldiers climbed while arrows pierced shields and helmets. One French soldier looked ready to give up. Joan shouted to him, "Raise your ladder again. France is watching." Something in her voice forced strength back into his limbs. He raised the ladder. And this time he reached the top. A thunderous cheer erupted. The French broke into the fortress. Steel clashed. Men cried out. The battle raged like a storm, unleashed by heaven itself. Finally, after hours of blood and flame, the English standard fell. Their commander was killed, and Les Trails was in French hands. Joan knelt on the battlements. Tears streamed down her face. "It is done," she whispered. "Orleans is free." Church bells rang across the city. People rushed from their homes, weeping, shouting, embracing strangers. The maid had done what armies had failed to do. She had broken the siege. Toward the crown after Orleans, France awakened like a giant rising from sleep. Villages sent soldiers. Cities declared loyalty. The people whispered Joan's name like a prayer. And Joan had only one goal now. We marched to Reims. The Dauphin must be crowned. The nobles hesitated. The road is dangerous. Cities may refuse us. The English still hold half the land. But Joan stood firm. A king cannot rule in God's name until he is crowned. And France cannot rise until it has a king. Her certainty overcame their fear. The army marched. One by one. Cities opened their gates. Towns surrendered without a fight. The people placed flowers in Joan's path. When the army reached Reims, the great cathedral bells roared like thunder. Inside the cathedral, the Dauphin knelt. Joan stood nearby, her banner held high just as she had vowed to do. As holy oil touched his forehead, The archbishop proclaimed, "Charles, by the grace of God, King of France." Tears poured from Joan's eyes. Her voice trembled. "My mission is fulfilled." The entire cathedral burst into cheers. The king looked at Joan and whispered, "It is you who brought me here." She bowed her head. It was God. The shadow of jealousy but glory is a flame that attracts both light and shadows. While common people adored her, many nobles began to despise her. She has too much influence. She is a peasant girl. She threatens our power. Even the king, fearful, insecure, began to distance himself. The commanders whispered behind closed doors, "If we let her continue, she will rule us all. She must be removed before she becomes dangerous." The fire of jealousy began to burn silently, but Joan remained unaware. Her eyes were fixed only on liberating France completely. The betrayal at Compiègne later. She led a small force to defend the city of Compiègne from the English and their Burgundian allies. It was a trap. When Joan charged out of the city gate with her soldiers, the Burgundians counterattacked from all sides. "Retreat!" Captains screamed. Joan turned her horse around and shouted, "Hold your ground. I will cover your retreat." She remained behind, fighting fiercely, giving her soldiers time to escape. "Close the gate!" a French officer yelled from the walls. "But Joan is out there." A soldier cried, "Close it." And they closed it. The gate slammed shut. Joan was left outside. Surrounded. Betrayed. A Burgundian knight grabbed her banner. Another dragged her from her horse. She fell into the mud as dozens of hands reached for her. It was over. "The maid is captured." The cry echoed across the battlefield. France trembled. The trial Joan was sold to the English for a bag of coins, the price of betrayal. She was dragged in chains to Rouen, where bishops and English lords held a trial. A trial meant not for justice, but revenge. They accused her of sorcery. Of pride, of hearing demons, of dressing as a man. Joan, thin, exhausted, wounded, stood alone. "I did only what God commanded," she said quietly. But her judges had no interest in truth. They wanted her silenced. Her voices questioned. Her faith mocked. Her purity ridiculed. Yet she answered every question clearly, bravely. One judge shouted, "You claim God speaks to you. Why would he speak to a peasant girl?" Joan replied, "He speaks to those who listen." Another demanded, "Do you think you are in God's grace?" She answered gently, "If I am not, may God place me there. If I am, may he keep me there." Even her enemies grew silent. They had expected a frightened child. Instead, they found a lion's heart, but they had already decided her fate. Fire in the market square in the morning of May 30th, 1431. Joan was led to the marketplace in Rouen. She was 19. A wooden stake stood in the center. Bundles of straw lay round it. English soldiers lined the square. The crowd gathered in thousands. As Joan was tied to the stake, she looked at the priest closest to her. "Hold the cross high," she whispered. "Let me see it until the end." The executioner lit the straw. Flames rose. The smoke curled around her like dark wings. People wept openly. Even English soldiers looked away. Joan prayed softly, "Jesus, Jesus." The fire climbed higher. Her banner, once bright as a star, lay folded in the dust. A soldier muttered, tears in his eyes. "We have burned a saint." As the flames consumed her, something miraculous happened. The wind blew the smoke away from her face, giving her breath until her final words were spoken clearly. "Jesus." Then the flames claimed her, and the girl who carried God's banner left the world, but not her light. The immortal legacy, English thought. Her death would break France. Instead dash it. Unleashed a storm. France rose with a fury the world had never seen. City after city fell to the French. The English were driven out of France. Charles VII ultimately ruled a free kingdom. 20-5 years later, the church declared Joan innocent. 500 years later, she was declared a saint, but she did not need titles. Her legacy was already immortal. A simple girl, a shepherd. A warrior, a leader, a martyr, a flame that no army, no king, no sword, no fire could ever extinguish. Even today, the people of France say, "We live because she believed." And history remembers her as Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, the girl who saved a nation, the fire that could not be killed. If you enjoyed this historical story, please like, share, and subscribe to Heroes of History. Thank you for watching. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so tell us in the comments below. See you in the next story of history's greatest heroes. If you want, I can also adjust the tone to more cinematic, dramatic. A shorter YouTube Shorts version. Create a signature Heroes of History intro you can reuse for all videos.